and I think it was full on. He's took his shirt off, he's thrown it around his head.
They couldn't put it back on.
And they couldn't get it back on again.
Because lots of stuff just disappears.
I think we must have been very thick-skinned back in those days.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we have got a very special guest for you. I am delighted to introduce Tina Grace, a key member of the Nike team that worked on all the innovation for the 2002 World Cup. Welcome Tina, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's the first time that we've probably met in 20 years, something as crazy as that.
And you look very different.
Yeah, thanks.
Tina played a hugely important role in the development of the Cool Motion technology for the 2002 World Cup, working with Craig. So I expect part of the conversation will be us commiserating with each other on just what that experience is like. I'd say that the leap between 1998 and 2002 was probably the biggest leap in the history of football kit evolution.
Yeah, when we look back to the World Cup, a lot of the pressure was on us because we're coming off the back of what was arguably a dodgy World Cup for Nike, because there was so much about Ronaldo at the time and should he have played, shouldn't he have played, and all that sort of stuff, and Nike forced it and all that. But I think there was pressure on us to really go way above and beyond. Yep. And what was quite interesting is when I came to the business, Tina had already started working on the whole concept of Cool Motion. So what I'd love Tina to tell everybody is, what was the starting point?
Well, what we were trying to do was really sort of analyse what the game day kit was for, what it was meant to do. It's sort of the way the military look at designing things. It was, how do you minimise the costs of wearing a kit and maximise the benefits? Okay. So if you were playing naked, you haven't got to worry about seam rubbing and things like that, that type of thing. So obviously if you're wearing a kit, that's when seams rubbing and movements can be a problem. So it was looking at that and really sort of breaking the kit down and understanding what the different elements of it are for. And then obviously there was the environment. So we looked at the activity and the human need. So we were looking at that at the time, and it was going to be in a really high humidity environment. Yeah. And then we had to do the same with the testing, because obviously if you're designing something for a specific environment, then you have to then take the final product and test it and make sure that it actually delivers.
And that's when we went to all those local teams and stuff and had the kids tried out on them.
In Thailand and things. And then we went to Barcelona and did tryouts on like different youth academy teams and things like that. And I was pregnant, heavily pregnant at the time, so I'm sitting there with my umbrella watching all these lads run around in this football kit to analyse whether it was actually going to deliver what we thought it was. So there was that. So there was really looking at the different components technically of what you need from a kit. So there was the team identifier element, obviously there's the sponsorship element, the covering of the body element, and then in a really high humidity environment, is there anything it can do to help you cool your body while you're playing? So
was there a moment it became apparent that the playing conditions were going to be so different than you'd created for in the past?
Well, what we did was we did a lot of interviews with the national teams who'd played other tournaments in those environments. So it started off with me interviewing a lot of them. And, the coaches, the managers and the players, and saying, what were the things you noticed most about this environment? How did it differ from... Because we had to deal with, they were going to be training in one condition and then playing in a different condition maybe. Yeah. Obviously, they go in acclimatised as part of the thing. So we've done a lot of research, so we understood sort of technically what the problem was going to be, but it's only when you actually go there yourself and you feel it. And particularly in Thailand, the humidity is just...
I remember when we went over there, I think it might have only been the second time I'd actually been to Tokyo, and we literally had about 100-yard walk from the lift to the taxi. And by the time I got to the taxi, I was just absolutely dripping. I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And that was the time that the event was actually going to take place. So we got first-hand experience of how humid it was going to be.
Yeah. And then we were thinking, okay, so how does your body cool itself and how do you move that amount of moisture? And I'd been getting into biomimetics at the time, so looking at nature and how it influences engineering of things and how nature solves problems. And I've been reading about termite hills and how they use reduce the airflow to keep constant temperature.
Yeah.
So that sort of led on to then looking at movement and how airflow moves around the body and how it's different from the wind moving through apparel as well. So we started looking at this bellows effect, how does the movement of the body move the air? Because the idea was we wanted to move the air through to help with the evaporative cooling as much as possible. Yeah. Obviously, once it reaches a certain saturation, you can't evaporate anymore into it. So
but that's the challenge you have as a designer, right? Because everybody, no matter what sport it is, if you're going to sweat and it's a high intensity sport, there really isn't anything out there that is going to dry because it's just not a technology.
It comes to the point
there.
of how do you make wet comfortable?
Yeah, exactly.
Wet dry.
And I remember some of those conversations as we were looking through everything. It's like, what's the best we can make it? And that's why when we look through the kits, we sat down and we're saying, right, okay, well, we're going to need something at the front so it catches the air as you're running, heavily vented in these areas where you get a lot of sweat. And then as you flipped it over, we had the huge venting on the back and on the underarms again, because we were talking about it having to exit as well, which goes back to the termites.
Warm air risers.
And it was also to do with the weight. So we wanted to try and reduce the weight of the kit as much as possible as well. And obviously when you have knitted, up until this point, it was like jacquarded and knitted fabrics, and they tend to they were holding on to it. So it was trying to do a lighter weight kit. So that was why we wanted to move to something which was still opaque. So, you couldn't see through it, but also it was light and it wasn't going to hold the moisture as much as well.
Because the other thing was, if you think about the body sweating, so we had the inner layer, which is catching, 70, if not 80% of the body sweat. And then this layer is having its own battle because it's trying to stop moisture from coming in from the atmosphere because it was so humid. So the shirt was expected to do so much. There was actually a water repellent finish, if you remember, we put on the...
put water repellent. Just so that this didn't get heavy. But also one of the reasons for having the mesh underneath was to stop the outer layers sticking to your skin as well, because that sort of like suffocates it. So this layer is a lot more comfortable on the skin, sort of sticking on your skin, and then the airflow's moving around.
Yeah.
Can you remember, was there a specific moment that you thought, this has got to be 2 layers?
Well, it was always from the start, because what we were trying to do was split up what the outer function was, which was the logo carrier and the team identifier, from the technical element.
Okay.
And we wanted it to be lighter weight, and we wanted a smaller silhouette, but still maintain the airflow.
Yeah, because I think at the time we were looking at samurai warriors as well, because we were looking at, if we had that inner torso covered, just cover the inner torso to capture the moisture, how would you then put on components around the body?
Originally it was like layers. It was the way the proper samurai stuff
works. And I remember
works,
I did that line drawing for marketing. They were like, oh, we can't use that because it was so bad.
And so with it being a 2-layer shirt and it was such a new idea, were there any problems with selling that to either your internal stakeholders or the athletes and federations themselves?
Well, that was why we had to do so much wear testing. That's why this sort of wear testing was so important, because we had to be comfortable that it was delivering what we said it was going to deliver. So we tested it separately, joins, different fabrics. So we did a lot of wear testing. And then we did a lot of testing because Nike had its own sports research labs. So we did testing in the sports research labs. And then we also did testing in, independent labs as well. There was one in Holland, I think it's TNO, I can't remember what it was called, but we did testing on Walter there. He was like the moving mannequin thing. So we did a lot of testing, and the idea of that is you do testing, so you've got the figures, and then you can hopefully work with some of the key athletes and get them familiar with it. It's all about familiarising them with it. And if that part isn't managed, expectations aren't managed, then that's when things can maybe go a little bit.
So some of the key influencers in each dressing room get...
You kind of bring them on board.
And generally when you can say to people, look, if you do this, it's going to mean this, this and this. We've got the figures, whatever.
But to be fair, there was always going to be 1 or 2 challenges.
You couldn't control.
I remember the US. In fact, I think we've got the kit there if you want to just chuck that over. The US being the national team for the brand, if you like. And if you look back at any of the images at the World Cup, at how the shirts are actually on those players, they are sticking to every one of them, because they were the only federation that totally rejected the cool motion concept. They would not have the 2 layers. And that was quite a thing, because it was already quite a challenge with them anyway, because we ended up having to put an extra shard in, just to make sure we got the red, white and blue, which I can understand to some extent.
Yeah.
You can present them with as many facts and figures as you like, but
if they don't want it,
they don't want it. And that was the only team that didn't end up taking it.
And it was also new. It was new for everybody, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it was new to us managing it in a very traditional sport. So the sport really hadn't moved a lot. So there were expectations all round that we were trying to manage. So
I mean, it was quite an amazing technology that was grounded in pure fact of how you can circulate air around the body. So we were comfortable that we had that covered.
Yeah.
Then from a design aesthetic, we came up with a really aggressive look. Then we came up with massive colour, which was the traditional colours, and ramped them up. It just kept on going every time. But we managed to do it.
Yeah, the
it
fact
really
that we got
did change the game.
fact that it became a product is probably quite a testament, isn't it? Because
absolutely.
lots of stuff just disappears.
I think we must have been very thick-skinned back in those days. But I think what it also shows is when you get some of these big powerhouses together, you know, they can pull on so much R&D resource, if you like. And that's why I loved working with Tina, because you could almost say, right, Tina, we've got this to come up with, go. And she would just go and research to the nth degree, if you don't mind me saying, but you would literally, and then you would just be presented with the facts. You were like, right, okay, great, off we go. Yeah. And it was great to have that within Nike, because that is what some of the big brands are really capable of doing, moving the needle so that people can perform to their optimum. And that's what we were always trying to do. It was form follows function every time.
It's really understanding the problem, not what you think the problem is, but taking the time to speak to the people who it's their world, understand what their problems are, and then with your knowledge of the technology, see how you can help solve it for them.
As you were going through the wear testing phase of it, how much did it change?
There weren't a lot of changes. I mean, at the time, Nike was promoting this standoff technology. So at the time, we were thinking maybe we could use that in this. But it was quite a thicker fabric. And in the end, with the wear trials and everything, it didn't work.
I think it was a sample.
Yeah, because we used to go shopping. We used to travel all around the world, like buying samples and stuff for different ideas. Oh, that'd be interesting for this, or that'd be interesting for that. But we did try knit. So again, when we did the lab research, we tried 2 layers of knit, the woven, with all these different sort of combinations.
In hindsight, is there anything you would have done differently with this?
It's hard to say, because at the time, I mean, now, you know, I mean, I could come up with a totally different way of solving the problems. But at the time, this is what it pointed to, and that's why we did it.
We all felt really confident about it. I think what ended up killing this was the fact that the players just couldn't get the kits back on once they'd taken them off.
But again, that was because they'd not had the kit early enough to acclimatise to it. You know, if you think of like Freeman, you know, somebody who's wearing a Swift suit for the Olympics, they don't just hand it to her before she goes on the track and say, there you go, get yourself into that. She works with that for months and months beforehand, so she totally understands.
Yeah, we had done the research, but we were caught out because players just couldn't get the thing back on again. Even after this event, if you remember, this then went straight to Man United. Man United took Cool Motion on, and I think it was Fallon who'd scored a goal. He's took his shirt off, he's thrown it around his head.
They couldn't put it back on.
And they couldn't get it back on again. And even then, you know, they were literally cutting it out at the sideline. It was then that you think, you know, we
should have just evolved it.
We could have. We absolutely could have.
But it moved into other sports then. I think they moved it into tennis.
That's right.
I think they did it in other stuff, didn't we? Basketball.
Well, I think as well, a couple of years after that, Under Armour emerged, didn't they? You know, if you think of the premise of Under Armour, it is basically this, but with 2 garments instead of 1.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly from my perspective, I think what we'd managed to do is kind of create a real definitive moment in Nike's history, really. We'd always been looking at technology in all of the sports, but then it just seemed to get ramped up here, and then it just kept on getting ramped up season after season. Yeah, it's good to see that they're still doing it today.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to Tina today for coming to visit us. Really appreciate that. Big thanks to Subside Sports for providing us with all of the shirts that have enabled us to take this amazing trip down memory lane. Make sure you get your hands on Subside's 25th anniversary magazine. Please leave a comment down below, and to make sure you don't miss any of our future videos, remember to hit subscribe. How many more instructions have I got?
What about asking them if they can donate some money?
Yeah? UNICEF?
No.
Anybody else?
No, okay.
What, to us?
Yeah.
No. Well, I got told off by you last time for mentioning money.
Alright.
Yes.
Because I said, if you don't subscribe, then we don't earn any money. He's like, don't say that, man.